You're gonna notice my terminology here. I say arrest. I don't say failure because you can't fail at having a baby. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Elizabeth, also known as Nurse Zabe, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. If you want to give this video a like, give me a follow, all that jazz would be lovely. But today's video is going to be all about supporting your body through a VBAC. And what is a VBAC? It is a vaginal birth after cesarean birth. And so this video is gonna kind of be about my experience over the summer where I supported my sister-in-law through her pregnancy and actual VBAC process. I want to talk with you guys about what she did, what we worked through together to help support her during the pregnancy, set her up both with her mind and her body to be prepared for a vaginal birth after cesarean, and then also what we did in the birth process, all the goodies and things that I brought in my little doula bag and used with her. This video is not going to just be for those who are hoping for a VBAC. It's also going to be helpful in giving you some tips if this is your first pregnancy, if you're hoping to have an unmedicated birth like my sister-in-law did, and just in general about choosing the facility in where you're going to be birthing to have the best outcomes possible that are going to align with your goals as closely as possible for birth. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into things. And if you are hoping for a VBAC, let me know your story down below. I want to hear everything that happened with your previous birth if you want to share it. This is a safe space always and forever to share your stories with like-minded people who probably are going through some similar feelings and experiences that you had. When we are thinking about having a VBAC or attempting a TOLAC, which is a trial of labor after cesarean, there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle that we want to look at before we ever enter the birthing suite. One of the first things that we can do when preparing our mind and our body for a VBAC is actually looking back at our first birth. And what I mean by that is that I want you to request your records from your OB provider. I want you to get those records in hand and I want you to look over them, because sometimes in the moment what is going on is not thoroughly explained to us, or when they go in for the cesarean birth they might notice, hey, your baby was sunny side up or in an OP position where it was less than optimal fetal positioning that led to the cesarean birth, but all you heard was my baby was too big to fit through my pelvis, right? And so it can be really helpful for us to dive further into what precipitated your primary cesarean birth, so that if we are looking for the future or looking towards the future, we can help think about ways that we can make an effort or a change there. For my sister-in-law, her primary cesarean birth resulted after a labor where she got to 8 centimeters and then had an arrest of dilation and an arrest of descent. You're gonna notice my terminology here. I say arrest. I don't say failure because you can't fail at having a baby, okay? But in your chart, you might see failure as a term that they say, and I hate that. I'm sorry, it's icky. There's a lot of terminology in childbirth that's icky. We're gonna say arrest here because that's what it is. The cervix, for whatever reason, stopped opening and your baby stopped descending into your pelvis for whatever reason. And there are a variety of reasons. The majority of cesarean births are for arrest of dilation, arrest of descent, but we can also have fetal intolerance of labor. So your baby was having recurrent heart rate changes that were concerning. We also can have cesarean births for baby being in less than optimal positioning. So this could be a transverse position or a breech position. Most hospitals in the United States do not support vaginal breech birth. Your primary cesarean birth might have been a result of an infection, right? You had chorioamnitis, maybe you had preeclampsia that was super severe. Something was going on that it was safer to get your baby out through a cesarean birth than continue in the laboring process. After looking through your records and kind of thinking more about your story of your first birth or of your primary cesarean birth, the next piece of the puzzle that you're gonna kind of want to think about is, do you want to switch providers? Now there might be a whole bunch of reasons why you consider changing providers. Maybe your first cesarean birth, there was some conflict with your provider. Maybe you didn't feel supported in the pregnancy or as supported in your choices in the labor and birth. Maybe you feel like you want to switch providers because you don't want to be going back to that facility. Maybe you've dug a bit deeper into your research and actually realized that that facility has a high primary cesarean birth rate. Leapfroggroup.org is a great place to look up cesarean birth rates for different facilities in your area. If there is a place that has a higher primary cesarean birth rate, chances are they're going to be less supportive of a vaginal birth after cesarean, and chances are TOLAC, or that trial of labor after cesarean, will be more likely to result in a repeat cesarean birth. The next thing when choosing your provider and maybe thinking about switching of providers is, do you want to switch from an OB level of care to a midwifery level of care? Now, what my sister-in-law did is she switched facilities entirely, because went back and looked at leapfroggroup.org, and the facility where she delivered had a high primary cesarean birth rate. She did not feel super supported by the nurses with different position changes or ideas when she was laboring. She did not feel super supported by the physician as they were kind of trying to figure out how to help her baby come down deeper into the pelvis and continue to open her cervix. She switched models of care. So she went to another hospital facility that had a midwifery model of care. This group of midwives, basically you would see them, you would get much longer visits, you'd get more in-depth conversation with them, and then during the birth, her midwife, once she hit active labor, stayed in the room with us for the entire duration of her birth, giving support, giving position suggestion ideas, just physically being with and present. It was amazing. And honestly, in the city where I live, I don't know that we have midwives that are that hands-on in the hospital. Now, you don't have to switch to a midwife. There are plenty of OBs who are supportive of VBACs, because 90% of people with primary cesarean births are good candidates for a VBAC. And 70 to 80% of TOLACs do result in VBAC. Finding a physician, a midwife who is supportive of those things is still important. And so when we're looking at support versus being tolerant of or being absolutely not supportive of, questions that you might want to ask. Are you comfortable with inducing someone who is trying to TOLAC if medically necessary? Because ACOG is. Are you comfortable with letting them go past a certain duration of pregnancy before saying, okay, we need to do a cesarean birth? If they say, if you don't go into labor before 39 weeks, then you need a cesarean birth, then they're not supportive of VBACs and what ACOG, or American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, says and how we should be supportive. If they talk to you solely about the risk factors of a VBAC, which there are heightened risks, especially of uterine rupture, but they don't talk to you about the risk factors of a repeat cesarean birth, then they might not be as supportive as you would think them to be. Because both of these options, and simply just being pregnant and having a baby, does put you at an increased risk, and it's their job to present these risks to you and then allow you to pick which feels best and right for you. And for the record, if after watching this video, if after your first cesarean birth, you're like, I just want a repeat cesarean birth, you still, my friend, are an absolute badass warrior, goddess, queen, for the record, because you're birthing your baby in a way that feels safe and right for you. And I love that for you. Providers that are also encouraging of you to be upright and moving during your labor, of delivering in positions that aren't just lying on your back, are going to be more VBAC friendly, VBAC supportive than those who say, okay, well, with a VBAC, you have to be on the monitor, which means you need to be on the bed in your back. There will be continuous monitoring for the most part in a hospital setting with a vaginal birth after cesarean, because one way that we can detect that risk of uterine rupture is by monitoring your baby's heart rate, because most of the time, if a rupture does occur, we will see a change in your baby's heart rate as a clue that something else is going on, as well as increased very different severe pain, sometimes even referred up to the shoulder. My sister-in-law, the facility where she delivered, had wireless monitoring, which was so cool and so handy. And she was in, up, and around, beep-bopping around, and her baby girl was staying on the monitor like beautifully, fabulously the whole time, which was great and just made it a lot easier for us to focus on position changes to help with baby descending into the pelvis and doing its thing. Now, here's what I will say. If you are considering a VBAC, one thing that she and I worked through together during her pregnancy was that we actually did the Spinning Babies Parent Educator class. So about a year and a half ago, I went to San Diego and actually took the Spinning Babies Parent Educator class training from Gail Tully herself, who is the founder of Spinning Babies, a fabulous midwife, doula, person who knows lots of things about the body. And so Spinning Babies is actually not about spinning the babies, moving the babies. Her babies spin on their own. they rotate, they tuck their chin, they descend into the pelvis. So what spinning babies is basically a whole shift on how we think about pregnancy. How can we, during your pregnancy, help make sure that your muscles, ligaments, fascia are ready to go, that they're supple, that they yield to baby, that they move, that they glide, that they are supportive. And then during your birth, how can we change your position to open up the different levels of your pelvis to allow baby to come down into your pelvis? And how can we troubleshoot if things aren't going as we would expect, if we have what spinning babies refers to as invitations to act, right? That your contractions are coupling, that you have horrible back labor, that you have start and stop labor, that your labor is feeling more intense than where your cervical dilation is. All things that we're like, okay, we probably need to adjust something to help your baby find their best space, because babies go where there's space. And so spinning babies is all about making space so that babies will find their best space and make it birth easier, faster, more enjoyable, dare I say. Spinning Babies has a website where you can search for parent educators in your area. Spinning Babies parent educator training is so helpful to give you the tools to kind of prepare your body in pregnancy for labor, and then also tools to help you move during your birth. And so it was really fabulous because we did all this together. When I arrived for her birth, we went through the 3 Sisters of Balance. We did some different stretches to release some different muscles, and then she just kind of went on her way. And there were a few different movements that we did throughout her birth, kind of at the guiding of me or at the guiding of her midwife, to just help her baby to continue to descend into her pelvis and find its best space. So I highly, highly recommend taking some sort of body preparation class for labor so that we can adjust any areas of your body that might need some more suppleness to allow baby to come down into your pelvis. Also, babies who are coming down in a better position, fetal positioning is like absolutely one of the most fascinating and important things in my personal opinion in delivering babies. And most of the time, babies know what they're doing. But when they need a little bit of help, babies who are optimally positioned will have better heart rate tracings than babies who are malpositioned, because babies who are malpositioned are getting pressure on different areas of their noggin, maybe triggering some baroreceptors or vagus nerves that are going to perhaps make them have some more decelerations in their heart rate. It'd be kind of wild to see in labor, when we help a baby find its space, that we see these heart rate changes actually resolve. Kind of a win-win when we're talking about a VBAC, right? The other thing that Becca did in her pregnancy to help prepare is she took a childbirth education class that was not offered with the hospital in tandem, but was actually through a private doula company. And I think it is a great idea to take your hospital childbirth education class just so that you're getting some of the hospital-based information and you kind of know where they are. But if you're not feeling like that's offering you a lot of different support coping techniques, pivot and take something else as well. The other thing that Becca did was she really had to prepare her mind for a VBAC. We talk about the 4 or 5 P's of birth. One of those is psyche. Our psyche has a really big role on hormone release, on us feeling safe and allowing our bodies to go into labor. And so she really had to do the work there. And for her, a lot of that work came from her spiritual guidance. She is a Christian, and so she got a lot of deep guidance from both the Bible and asking for friends and family to pray for her, as well as praying for herself. Printed off Bible verses and actually wrote those up around the room so we could say those to her when she felt like she needed to hear them. She also listened to Christian hypnobirthing tapes to just kind of remind herself and her baby that they were safe and that they were doing what God designed them to do. Now, you might not be religious, but there are still ways that you can take this psyche transformation and really take it to heart. One way that this translated in labor is that very often after a contraction, maybe especially one that felt really intense or overwhelming, my sister-in-law, instead of saying I can't do it, which indeed was kind of what she was thinking, was like, oh my gosh, that was a lot, she would verbalize, I can do this. And then not only is she kind of tricking her brain because she's saying this super positive thing, so her brain's like, oh hey, I like that, everyone else in the room would echo that back to her. Yes, you can do this, you're doing amazing. It's a really good hack for encouraging our brain during hard times, is just to lie to ourselves. Just a little bit, to welcome those contractions if they're coming, be like, oh my gosh, yes, another one, I can do this, I am doing this, and then have everybody in the room echo it back to you as well. The other thing that she detailed to me that she really kind of had to come to grips with was that her first birth, her first cesarean birth, was not a failure. There is so much negative language around cesarean birth, especially from those who maybe have never had a cesarean birth, right? Who are like, oh, well, these are all the things you could have done to prevent it. When it's like, okay, but that's over and this is where we are right now, and the birth of my first child was not a failure. And God, it's making me kind of emotional. Whew. The birth of my first child was not a failure, and I didn't do anything wrong, and he and I were working together to get him here as safely as possible, and the guidance that my providers gave me was the information that I had at the time to make the decision to get him here as safely as possible. And really, truly, like, getting that weight off of her shoulders and realizing that no matter what happens forward, whether we have this vaginal birth after cesarean like we're planning, or we have, you know, an unforeseen repeat cesarean birth, that neither one of those is a failure, and really just trying and giving it her best and her all was what she could do in that situation. So important to be able to wrap your head around that. For the record too, if we're having a repeat cesarean birth, we can still have a trauma-informed, gentle repeat cesarean birth that is very healing, just as much as having a vaginal birth after cesarean can be a healing experience for you. It really is about choosing that team that is there to walk through that with you. And one part about having that team that is there to walk through that with you is considering hiring a doula or having labor support. And it might be your partner, but that you guys are walking through each step of this together, that you're taking the childbirth education classes together, that you're doing the work together so that you have that really strong support. Where Becca delivered and the midwife group that she delivered with highly encourages everybody to have doulas. And so I was lucky enough to kind of be her doula in this situation. And while I'm not specifically trained as a doula, I do have a lot of background training in support, labor support, and VBAC support, because I do that all at my nursing job. So I was so honored and so lucky to be able to walk through that journey with her. The other thing that I want you to be mindful of when you're preparing for your VBAC is when you're going to arrive to the hospital. So I want you to touch base with your provider when you're going into labor and just see what they're recommending. Becca's midwives recommended her staying at home until active labor, until she was contracting every 2 to 3 minutes. So that's exactly what we did. But when we arrived to the hospital, another thing that she did, she declined a cervical exam at that time. And she actually waited a few hours before having a cervical exam. And when her midwife was like, is it okay if I do this cervical exam just so that I can see the positioning of baby too? Because her waters were broken, so she could feel the top of the baby's head and see what position baby was in. And Becca consented to this. Becca said, you know what? I don't want to know how dilated my cervix is. So guess what? Because I heard, I'm nosy, and I went over and listened. And she was 5 centimeters dilated, and she was contracting strong contractions every 2 to 3 minutes, really working through them. And afterwards, you know, I was like, you were 5 centimeters when they checked you. And she was like, I'm really glad I didn't know that, because it would have been really discouraging. And also keep in mind, maybe an hour after this, she had a baby in her arms. So that knowledge of where she was, if that's going to impede you, if that's going to bring you down, if it's not as much as you thought you were going to be, you can ask them not to tell you. If you are planning a VBAC though, even if you're planning an unmedicated VBAC, the one thing to kind of also keep in mind is that you will see anesthesia more than likely at some point during your labor. They might want to come in and do some consents with you and just chat with you. And it's not because they don't believe in you, but their whole side of this picture is like, okay, if we need to do a cesarean birth, maybe even if it's an emergency cesarean birth, I want to be covered. I want to have met the patient. I want to know them. And they're just there to meet you and greet you. And they want to look at your airway. They want you to open your mouth. I think the last part of this video, I want to show you all of the things, the goodies that I brought, and tell you if, when we use them, give you recommendations for yourself for the future. And this is for supporting not just vaginal birth after cesarean, but also just unmedicated birth and birth in general, because like, even if you go in thinking, okay, yes, I'm going to get an epidural, there's going to be time before that epidural works. There might be time after the epidural that we're waiting for it to work, or we're having to troubleshoot the epidural. So like, these are all things that can be super helpful. First and foremost, I'm going to say anything that needs to be charged or needs a battery, make sure that it's charged and has fresh batteries. A little fan. Very nice. Great for postpartum too, when you're getting those night sweats, but you don't want to get baby chilly. Also great for making your hair look fabulous. I have a love-hate relationship with twinkle lights, and I think if you get them just for this purpose, fabulous. But if you're somebody who's like setting out your twinkle lights, maybe you're in your childbirth class every week and then taking them up, they just are a tangled, what a tangled web we weave. So know that they might get a little bit tangled, and if that's totally not your vibe, icicle lights are great too and get way less tangly. So I did have some issues with my twinkle lights being tangled, but we did put them up. The other thing that we both brought, she brought them and I brought them, little fake candles. You can't have real candles in the hospital. It's too bright in here for you guys to see. But this is on, a little twinkle. Great way to set the mood and the ambiance, because when you go in there, I want you to shut the blinds, I want you to turn all the lights off and just have it nice dark, your little cave, your little oxytocin endorphin cave. Melatonin as well, right, is all vibing in there. The other thing that can be really helpful to bring when you're laboring in the hospital, when you're laboring at home too, is a scarf, like a nice sturdy scarf. I've had this one for years. We can use this for a lot of things. We can use this for squatting in the bathroom. There was like a side rail, so I put that up on there, and then she could pull down while she was having a contraction while sitting on the toilet. We tied a couple knots in this when we were at her house and used it to kind of pull and sway back on a door frame. So this was over the door and the door was shut. We can also use this for a little booty jiggle or a little belly lift as well. So scarves can be great, and you can use a hospital sheet, but the scarves are just so much softer. One thing that we didn't have that would have been great to have, gum. Gum is fabulous because it is going to freshen the people's breath around you that you might be breathing in when you're in labor, and you're like, ooh, that's not a great smell, because we're all mouth breathing in the hospital, right? We're all working through it. Also can be great to kind of re-moisten your mouth as well. If you throw up, a little gum can be great to kind of freshen things up. I love gum. One thing that we didn't have that would have been helpful to have was, we were going to the hospital during the day with a eye mask to keep it nice and dark in the car, and also so that you're not focusing on exactly where you are and you could just still focus on the contractions in the car. We had sunglasses, but I did not have the eye mask at the time. Another thing that we had that we tried, Becca didn't like it, but I have seen a lot of success with it, and honestly I think we were using it kind of at the wrong settings, was a TENS unit. So this goes on your lower back and you turn it on during a contraction, you bump it up to the highest setting, it creates little electrical impulses that just jiggle the muscle in your back, so it kind of distracts you from the pain of the contraction. This is the gate control theory, just like the comb that you squeeze, which I'm sure we had at her birth too. She wasn't using it all the time, she was really practicing open palm. But this is a great option, maybe something to play around with before labor. I still use this, I kept this, and I use it for my menstrual cramps, so I love it. A yoga block we can use when you are sitting on the toilet to almost act as a squatty potty. We can use it to do some asymmetrical movements, even on hands and knees, having one knee on the yoga block and one knee on the bed. We can use this to release your psoas muscle in this great little technique that I learned from Body Ready method. Not something that we typically have in the hospital, although we do tend to have stools. The other thing that I cannot sing the praises of enough, if you're somebody who's like, I'm gonna be on my hands and knees in labor, maybe you wanna be on my hands and knees in the tub, right? These floors are hard. The bed honestly isn't that much better. A kneeling mat. So this is something that you get if you're like a laborer, okay? And you're gonna be on your feet and you're gonna be on your knees. We had somebody who was coming to clean out our air vents leave this at our house. They said we could keep it. I said, thank you, I love it. You can put this in the tub with you and kneel on it. They're like $30 at Lowe's. Okay, so that's the video. I hope that it was helpful for you, maybe gave you some tips, tricks, things to think about as far as supporting a vaginal birth after a cesarean. If you want any more details or have any more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you attempted a TOLAC, please let us know what helped that to feel as successful as possible for you, whether it resulted in a VBAC or a repeat cesarean birth. I want to hear your stories, and I want you to feel like this is a wonderful and safe place to share them. So until next time, bye guys.